The NBA playoff race is heating up. This is episode 11 of Third and Five. All right, welcome into episode 11 of Third and Five. Dave Rice, Chris the Beer, James Thwaites in the middle, and me, Simon Hampton. We're here. Three Kiwis in Brooklyn to talk five topics around American sports. Gents, we're back in person after a few remote episodes. It's good to see your faces again.
It's good to see both of you. I hope you had fun ditching me. I mean, obviously you went to Phoenix, Dave, and then Si, you went upstate New York. And for those that are listening that don't know about upstate New York, it's fucking massive. It could be anywhere.
It's a big,
it's a common thing to say going upstate New York. But been good. It's good to see you.
It's kind of from movies, you hear it. It's on TV and movies, and they're like, "Oh, we're going upstate." It's like going to the Hamptons, It's kind of this sort of aura about it. You don't know what it really means.
That's actually what a lot of people say when they're like, "What even does going upstate mean?"
Yeah,
because a lot of people don't realize also that New York State extends that far.
Oh, it's massive.
It goes all the way to Canada.
Driving from New York to Buffalo takes like 8 hours or 9 hours or something like insane.
It's the size of the North Island, basically.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's huge.
But yeah, I've never been to the Hamptons either.
Never. I've been to the Hamptons briefly. Never to state. I've done some work stuff up there. With the US Open was up there a few years ago at Shinnecock Hills, and I went and covered Ryan Fox playing up there.
Oh, nice.
Day trip.
Weird, magical place.
Yeah, very magical place. But I feel like sports heating up again, which is great.
Shit, yeah.
Everyone but Major League Baseball, which just cancelled the first few series of their season.
A lot of mind games being played.
So what does that sort of mean? Normally it's a sort of 3-4 match.
Yeah, so it's like
series.
It'll be.
So you're talking about 7 or 8 games.
Probably six to 8 games. I think it'll end up being more because what's happened is they set this deadline and they work sort of round the clock. They're up till 3 a.m. negotiating last night, and then now we've hit this deadline, and both parties are going to go their separate ways. And so I imagine it's going to take a bit of time for them to reconvene. And so,
I'm surprised that 3 a.m. like they called it, like just go through. I'm surprised that
probably had a wall.
I think it was a PR stunt. I think
I
think Major League Baseball, the owners, did that and fed all these stories to the press that they were working around the clock and they were progressing towards a deal, so that when a deal didn't happen, they could just blame the players and say that they. Because then all the messages the day after were that the players' tone had changed and all this stuff.
Yeah,
and so it was just I don't know. When you look at the numbers that have been thrown around about the two sides' proposals, we don't need to get into the technical stuff, but they're a long way apart.
So is there one big main point that they're stuck on, or is there like a couple, or
there's a couple. So in baseball, rookie contracts are really low. The lowest in any of the North American sports. And so the players want to introduce like a bonus pool for players with 0 to 3 years of service time.
Okay.
And the players initially wanted that bonus pool to be about $120 million. The owner's proposal was $10 million.
Oh, okay. So
the players got down to 95 and the owners got up to 20.
Okay.
And then the other big thing is the luxury tax, which is currently at about $210 million for a team payroll. The players want that to go far north because the owners are all just treating that as a hard salary cap. The players want it up, over the next 5 years to go from about 240 million and increase to around 270. And the owners have said we'll go up to about 220, increasing to maybe 230 over 5 years.
And
so there's tens of millions.
And who? So I assume it's kind of like tennis and other sports where there's like a players' association that there's representatives. Like I think it's Garrett Cole.
Garrett Cole,
he's one of the main guys.
On there, yeah. A lot of the. It's kind of funny
because it's kind of like kind of captains or kind of leaders within a lot of the teams.
They're just the vocal guys that they become that the club they play for. Ironically, union rep, and then that gets them heavily.
Ironically, probably the guy like with Djokovic, probably the guys that don't need any more money themselves, but you're hoping that they're looking out for the sort of the lower sort of players.
Well, it's
that are on that not as much money.
Chris Paul, stuff. I know, is like a big voice in the NBA with the Players Association.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the big sticking point for this is that baseball players want to get paid more early on in their career because that's often when they're playing the best and the best output. And so it is kind of funny that, those guys that are on the minimum wage are not the ones that are at the forefront of these negotiations. It's the guys, the veterans with the $40 million contracts.
But yeah, when you think of thinking about last year, the guys that were all leading the like MVP conversation, they would all be on the rookie contracts. They were all in their first few years, weren't they?
Yeah, guys like
Tatis.
Tatis. Well, he signed a big 14-year extension. But if he was going on the normal pay structure, he would be on a rookie salary, which is about $550,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
Juan Soto is a generational player, still on
what's the guy from in Toronto?
Bo Bichette, Vlad Guerrero, all on the minimum. So these are the best players in the league. And then what happens is it takes 6 years to reach free agency. So they're not reaching free agency until they're 30, 31, and they get a big deal. But the owners are realizing that if you give an 8-year deal to a 31-year-old, you're really only getting 2 or 3 years of good production.
Yeah.
And so those
can they get picked up earlier? Can someone? Oh no, they can't. Because
they're under club control for the first 6 years, and you don't usually make the majors until you're sort of 24.
So, you said 6-year rookie contract.
Well, you're under club. It's 6 years. 6 years of rolling 1-year contracts, and the club can release you at any point, and then you can sign for anyone. But the club controls you for those 6 years.
And this is interesting. And we're actually going to touch on this a little bit later on when we talk about kind of some of the NFL offseason stuff as well. Because Kyler Murray's been a talking point. He's earning $5.4 million this year. And someone was like, hey, what if he'd gone to baseball? He'd be earning considerably less. Just bulked up.
He'd probably still be in the minors because you get drafted and it takes 3 or 4 years to reach the majors.
Exactly.
And then when you do, you've got 3 years earning the minimum, which is $550, which is, obviously, to us, a lot of money, great salary. But when you're, one of the top athletes in a very specialized field, it's not very much.
When he was picked 8th overall by Oakland, and with the clause that he was allowed to play his final senior year, or his maybe it was his junior year, but was going to be his last year of football.
Yeah,
and then he had a Heisman year, becomes number one, and then it became if he didn't have such a strong season and he might have been picked low down, it would have been interesting if he would have considered baseball, but it was a no-brainer when you just look at that financial.
Yeah, but this is the weird thing, right? The baseball draft sucks because shit like that happens. Russell Wilson, was the same thing where they're actually drafting players in high positions that realistically probably are never going to play the sport.
Yeah, the baseball would easily have the most busts in the first round than any other sport.
Yeah.
But so we'll obviously wait and see. You hope that they'll get it resolved and we'll only miss a few weeks, but there's pessimistic take with it. They're so far away, and the players have been fucked over on so many deals, collective bargaining agreements over the years, that they really want to hold firm on this one.
It is annoying because it should be spring training should be year-round now.
Yep.
It's normally about March, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then the season normally starts late March. So
and spring training's pretty cool. I like the idea of spring training. You go down to Florida, you spend some time
Arizona, the warm parts of the country.
Yeah, kind of spend some time in the sun. You just go watch these players sit. We had a friend do it a couple of years ago and loved it. Sounds like a great thing. 2,000 or 3,000 seater stadiums. Yeah, it's cool.
So obviously we'll watch that eagerly, but we're gonna may as well get things rolling though. We're going to talk a lot of NBA as we do on this podcast.
What are we talking about today, guys?
So we're going to talk about James Harden because he's had 2 pretty strong performances for Philly, and then we're going to rip into the rest of the East Conference. We're going to also later on start a new segment leading into the playoffs where we sort of do a deep dive on 2 of the top NBA teams, to the top NBA contenders each week, and then we've got some NFL free agency stuff and the bets, of course. But
nice.
Let's kick off. James Harden, everyone's most loved NBA player, particularly on this podcast.
Before we drive in, can we just say a collective fuck James Harden?
We can do a collective.
Yeah. Oh my god, fuck James Harden! It just. What he did in the end with the Nets sucked. It really did. And it sucks so more that he did so much to get to Brooklyn.
he had this whole thing happen in Houston, and then 1 year later, he's doing it all again to leave Brooklyn to go to Philly. Yeah, it's frustrating. And then, it is frustrating when you see him put up that performance he did in Sacramento, which I think was his last Nets game, where he got 4 points the whole game.
It probably says a lot about his character, right? About the sort of guy, because at the end of the day, a name like that, when Durant goes down, you've obviously got the issues with Irving, Kyrie. And so you needed him to step up. And you can see that when you've watched games recently of the Nets without any of them, with obviously no Harden, Simmons not playing yet, like they are lacking that player that can score 38 points, 40 points, or, and really sort of lead the team. A lot of good role players, but they need that. And so he needed to step up. And I think that would have been really good for his legacy if he was able to kind of, carry that team through that lull. And then obviously KD comes back. Hopefully Kyrie's able to become more available and then, have it to the title. But instead he's gone, here's Joel playing MVP level. Let's get to the 76ers. And all of a sudden looks a rejuvenated player and is actually trying. And it's amazing what happens when you try.
Yeah,
when you're that good.
So look at those numbers: 27, 12, and 8. First game against Minnesota, and then a triple-double, 29, 16, 10 against the Knicks. Very good numbers, better than I think most of his games for the Nets this season. But I don't know. It's the first 2 games, and when he debuted for the Nets, he put up a pretty impressive triple-double as well, after looking out of shape and awful in Houston. So I don't know. I don't think you can read too much into these last few games.
Fuck no, absolutely not. And looking at his 2 games as well,
they're also not very good team.
Correct. It's against the fucking Timberwolves, and then the Knicks, who did not start Kemba Walker. Kemba Walker is sitting for the rest of the season.
They've white flagged the season.
100%. And the remainder of their schedule is fucked. They basically tried, said anyone's available to trade, at the trade deadline, couldn't shift anyone. So they're not great teams. The Knicks, to put it in perspective, have given up, I think it was probably over the last 45 days, they've busted 3 20-point leads over their opponents and lost, including to the Nets. So there isn't too much to read into those teams, but I will say, James Harden is a good basketball player. He knows how to play great basketball. He knows how to play the rules to his advantage. He's very much like a Richie McCaw in that respect, which is always taking the rules very much to the breaking point. He's conscious of where the balls are, the ball is in his hands and where the players' arms are. So people obviously get very frustrated that he's always shooting free throws, but you watch his game style close enough, he looks at where their arms are and brings it the ball up in a shooting motion to get those 2 points. And fair play to him. It's boring as fucking hell to watch that team, because on Saturday or whenever they played the Knicks, Embiid was doing it and Harden was doing it. And it was dry as shit watching them. I think Embiid went to the line 27 times or something like that. It was ridiculous. James Harden is a good basketball player though. He will do well there. Things that kind of throw out concerns to me at James Harden at the 76ers are what they're going to have to commit. And as well, I think that East is pretty tough work. I think 76ers don't have a super easy schedule.
No, they've got the Knicks again next.
I think they
and
also
then they've got the Cavs, the Heat, the Bulls, and the Nets, who will probably be at full strength.
I think what the problem they've also got is probably a lack of true depth.
100%.
Yes.
So you are 100% right. You open that fucking roster and look at the 76ers bench. It is awful. And that's what I'm just bringing up now.
They'll get DeAndre Jordan though.
Yeah, did you see DeAndre Jordan's play when he was playing for the 76ers and tried lobbing it and just threw it about 20 feet higher out of the court?
No one's playing well for the Lakers.
No. So they will get DeAndre Jordan, but their bench does not have depth.
What will be interesting for seeing Harden? The 76ers, regardless of their schedule, they'll be in the playoffs.
Of course.
We're going to expect that. So it'll be really interesting to see how Harden particularly performs at that sort of, with a bit of a, sort of the torch on him, showing layers to see, okay, you've come here to win a chip, and now this is when you need to really step up with Embiid. And I'm not convinced. I think a lot of people a lot of fans and things question whether he's got the medal when it comes to those sort of crunch games. So yeah, I think that's what we'll get to see. I mean, we'd all love to see Nets 76ers. That will be a dream for the NBA in terms of just the amount of interest that will have likely go deep.
Good chance of it too.
The other thing is like that. I think with that 76ers, you could say this about a lot of teams. So I realize what I'm going to say is slightly stupid as well. But if they got hit with an injury to Harden or Embiid, either or, like their season's gone 100%. Harden has come back from injury. So it sounds like that injury he had was potentially a legitimate injury. I thought he was sitting out just to get traded, but he obviously didn't play a few games when he came back for Philly after the trade deadline. So maybe that was his problem, like prior to it, because that last month he played for the Nets, you definitely did see him go down.
It wasn't just the hamstring that led him to play, to get 4 points in Sacramento.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a legitimate injury, but I don't think he was also in a rush to try and get back on the court for the Nets.
Yeah, it's been interesting with Durant. I've really been careful with Durant and not rushing him. From all accounts, he's ready to go, and he's been ready to go for the last 2 or 3 games, but they are clearly wanting to not flare up anything and really, and that makes for an exciting rest of the next few months into those playoffs, because everyone's positioning themselves and their squads and getting everyone fresh as they need to have that push.
One thing like that has annoyed me about the 76ers though is just the absolute hype of Harden going there. And it's a really weird shift. And this highlights something that's pretty interesting, I think, about the NBA fan base is when Harden went to the Nets, there was a lot of hate, which is fair enough because
become a super team,
casual fans.
Since Miami Heat,
casual fans usually hate Harden and they usually hate super teams, which is totally fair enough because it does take away a little bit from the league. I get that. But at the same point, when Harden's teamed up with Embiid, there has been this shift, or at least I've seen the shift over here in the US where people are like, oh my God, Harden just threw an assist to Embiid. This is amazing. And it's weird to see that shift as well. Philly's a weird sports town. I don't know. It's going to be interesting, I think, to reflect back on this in a year and really see it, how Harden's going. Because like I said, he's a great basketball player. I'm not taking that away from him. I am pissed off that he left the Nets in the way he did and everything that went down. But I do want to see how it all goes and what his contract looks like. There's extension.
I don't think they'll win the title.
I
think the Heat, the Nets at full strength, probably the Bucks are better shots.
And I know
and
we're
then
going to talk
you've
about
got the Warriors and the Suns out west if they make it to the finals.
Yeah,
I don't think that.
And I know we're going to talk about the East in a second and the clog that's happening there, but I kind of agree with you. The East feels like a coin flip to a certain extent, but probably.
And does that make with the East being you could see a lot of 7-game series and a lot of just tough matchups because you've got some very good teams deep in the lower end of the playoff there in the East in particular. Does that mean does that favor a West team from winning the whole NBA because they might have they could be more fresh than a team in the East that might have had a tougher road? My gut feel is no, because often you can look at that, and tennis is another good example where you might have a guy who's played all these 5-setters and then come and someone that's just had easy straight set wins, but these guys are just so fit, and when they have to, they can just turn it on. So I feel like that's probably the same in basketball.
I don't think so.
Although the West is going to be a cake.
And it's not going to be a cakewalk.
The
Nuggets and
the Mavs and those lower seed teams, they're probably not the same as the teams in the same position in the East, the Bucks and the Celtics, but they'll put up a fight. But
I don't think there's going to be a lot of 4-0, and that's probably a good thing for the NBA. There's not going to be a lot of 4-0 in any of the rounds. I'd be surprised anyway.
Well, the other thing about the West as well is Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray are potentially coming back, which makes the Nuggets even more scarier than they already are. You've got the Mavs who's had another cylinder on defense, which is crazy. And then you've got the Suns, the Warriors, the Grizzlies, the Jazz, and then the play-in teams are kind of I don't think I'd be worried about any of the play-in teams in the West.
Unless the Lakers somehow
found it. The Pelicans in the play-in tournament. 11 games.
Yeah.
Under 500.
Yeah. I mean,
are they in the 10th?
The 10th.
Yeah.
They're 25 and 36.
And that's without Zion.
I mean, that's not a good good advocate for having a play-in.
At least in
Having
the
a team
East,
like that in like a playoff contention.
the Hornets have a losing record, but the Hornets are a decent side.
Yeah.
Pelicans aren't really a decent side.
But yeah, top 6 in the West scare the shit out of me. Anyone in that play-in thing, like who cares? I mean, the Lakers are obviously falling apart as well.
Yeah, let's pull back to the East and start our second topic here, because it is very interesting. So as we record this, you got the Heat, the Bulls, 76ers, Bucks, Cavs, Celtics, Raptors, Nets, Hawks, and Hornets. That's the top 10, and I think those 10 will be the 10.
So who's in 11? Is that
The
Knicks?
Wizards.
Wizards and Knicks, probably just outside. Yeah.
The Wizards are only a game and a half back, but I don't think they've got. I think the Hornets are a better side.
I think they've got a few injuries as well. Yeah. So I think you're bang on. I think that's the 10. It's just what position's obviously going to be tussling for.
Yeah, and obviously we're big fans of the Nets here. I think one of the interesting topics, and we're going to talk about the whole conference broadly, but the Nets are in 8th, and we all know they're going to make a strong push down the stretch here when all their stars come back. But I look at that top 6. If they're to avoid the play-in tournament and finish 6th or above, I just don't know who they're knocking out. Like
I can tell you they're probably knocking out. Like, I mean,
who do you think?
So kind of to
Boston and 6th, they're playing good basketball.
Boston and 6th, yeah, but I reckon Boston's going into the play-in tournament. I reckon they're dropping down. They have one of the hardest strength of schedules remaining. When you look at the top 3 strength of schedule remaining, so strength of schedule basically takes into account the teams with the remaining games and calculates the combined winning percentage for all their remaining opponents. So the toughest is the Bucks. Second is overall in the NBA is the Lakers, so you can pretty much count them out. I think they're going to potentially drop out of their one as well. But just looking at the East, it's the Bucks, the Bulls, Boston, New York. Then it jumps down to Philadelphia. You got Orlando, who gives a shit. Then you got Cleveland, Miami, Charlotte, and then Brooklyn right down the bottom. So all of those teams have some tough games coming up. Like Milwaukee, they're playing the Suns, they're playing the Warriors, they're playing the Grizzlies, they've got the Heat. You've got Boston, which I think is, again, the Bucks, I think, can beat some of those opponents. Boston's playing the Grizzlies twice. They've got the Warriors, they've got the Heat, they've got the Bulls, they've got the Bucks. And then you've got the Chicago Bulls, who have to go up against the Bucks 3 times with the remaining games. I think that opens it up a lot. Especially when you look, I don't think things are going to change drastically. I think if it's going to happen, the Nets may have a shot to get out into that 6th spot. I think Toronto, obviously,
they've got an easy schedule.
Yeah, Toronto's got an easy schedule, so Toronto's up there as well. The teams that I'd be looking to probably drop down more the Boston Celtics, and then maybe
I think the Bucks might be a shout to drop out. And it's not just on that player. We saw a banged up Nets side go to Milwaukee and topple them. They've sort of been they've shown patches of brilliance throughout the year, but they haven't really hit their stride. I don't know. I look at the Bucks and they have a tough schedule.
I think that's kind of been the East in general. I feel like and you're talking about the Celtics, who are, quite recently, I think, had won 9 out of the last 10 games, and they're starting to hit a bit. I think they lost a bad one the other day, and they're losing at the moment to the Hawks. So, yeah, I could definitely see. I'd probably be the same as you, Thwaites, that Celtics are going to be the team, especially with that schedule, that might drop away. And it's just because, yes, they've been in good form, but that's not going to last forever, I don't think. And I'm not surprised to see that it won't. So it's just everyone's gone through these peaks and troughs throughout the season. And
remember the Bucks, when we were having that conversation about contenders and pretenders. And at that time, the Bucks were playing awful. And then they went through this big drive of playing amazingly. And then now it's they've got this tough schedule. They either get their shit together and go lights out and get up there, or they potentially drop out. And again, it's very hard for them to drop out. They've got 20 games left in the season. But honestly, Boston definitely.
Yeah, but the Raptors are 3 games back of them. The Nets are only 5. There's not huge gaps.
There's not, but one of those teams is going to get their shit together, right? You can't expect that the Bucks, the Cavs, and the Celtics are all going to go down the toilet. Because...
No. I'm not saying all of them, but I'm saying one of them. And my pick is I think if we're going to go round table and say who's going to drop out for the Nets, I'm going to pick the Bucks.
Okay, I like
Drop
that.
out.
Yep.
You two both going Celtics.
I'd
If you had to pick one team to drop out for the Nets, top six.
I'd pick up the Celtics. Yep. Celtics would be my call.
Yeah, I mean that's.
I'm doing that a very little. I just watched them the other day and they look poor.
Yeah.
So it's a very small sample that I'm
using. The other one would be the Cavs, who are, there's a lot less experience in that side going down the stretch when things get close.
That's a fair thing. But the good thing for me in general, like I can't try and remember, like right now, the NBA, like just in terms of who's going to win, I think it's right up in the air. Like obviously you're going to have your favorites. I mean, the bookies still seem to think the Nets are like big favorites, or up there as favorites. You've obviously got the Warriors on the West and the Suns and Grizzlies there, but I truly think like there's a lot of teams that are worthy of the discussion of being like of getting a run. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think many saw the Bucks before at this time last year. People were talking about the Bucks as being, these guys are going to win it, I feel like this is quite an open NBA, probably more so than many seasons, which is kind of what you want as a fan, like.
Yeah, and I think in my head, right, like with the East, I think the Heat are pretty much locked into that first position. I think everything else will just move around.
Yeah,
it'll go all over the place.
I could see the Bulls dropping down a little bit potentially. One thing I actually think will be interesting, the play-in tournament in the East is going to be far better than the West, because we just talked about the Pelicans being in the West. And, those teams are not very good. But the East, I look at the Hawks. The Hawks are a decent side. The Hornets are a decent side. The Raptors are probably going to be in there. If the Nets are in there,
or any of the ones about it,
that's going to be
absolutely. I think every one of those teams, and when you think about the Hornets and the Hawks, like they've got two young, they've got guys that you want to see in action and play exciting.
Yeah, the Hawks, what they went to the semifinals,
finals, Eastern finals.
Yeah, so there's the play-in tournament in the East is going to be fun.
That makes them dangerous for me as well, the Hawks, because they got to the Eastern. No, just because getting to the finals, they had to get to the finals. You've got to win tough series, and
who did they beat?
They played they played the Knicks.
No, who else did they beat? They beat someone else though.
No, to get to the finals, you got to beat someone else.
Was it Philly?
It was Philly. Was it Philly? Yeah.
Or did Philly go up against the Bucks?
It was Philly, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think if you're in 9th or 10th spot or on the East on the play-in tournament, you're fucked. You are not going anywhere. You are not getting out of there. That is the worst position you could possibly be. If the Nets are 9th and 10th spot,
got to win two one-offs.
Yeah. It's not one-offs, right? The home.
No, so 7 plays 8, right?
And if you're 9 and 10th,
so 7 plays 8. If you lose that, if 7 or 8 loses, do they then host the next game against the winner of 9-10? Who hosts that game?
Yeah. So whoever loses.
Okay, so from okay.
Yeah. The loser is 7. So 7 and 8, and that makes sense. They're favouring those teams that finish in the traditional playoffs.
Yeah, which top 8. Yeah.
Ironically,
Brooklyn's record at home is pretty bad. So hosting is not necessarily an advantage for them.
Yeah, and I think there's a whole big what if for Brooklyn at the moment. We've obviously gone through the roller coaster of seeing Kyrie Irving can absolutely play at home in Brooklyn.
Milwaukee.
He was amazing. So if Kyrie Irving is playing at home for the rest of the year and can play 19 out of the 20 remaining games or whatever, that's a different story. If he can still only play away games, I think it makes obviously the Nets' chances of getting out of that play-in spot really tough work.
All of a sudden, the Nets are hoping for away games in the play-in.
Yeah.
The Nets are, we've talked a lot about them, but the Nets are a funny team, right? They right now, the way they lost to the Raptors the other night with none of their stars in the core, they looked awful. But that just having Kyrie back by himself lifts that team a lot, and then when you add KD and Simmons and potentially Joe Harris, so they're going to be a different side, and you can see why the bookies had them still as one of the title contenders, because even if they win out of the play-in tournament, then they're playing. Even if they're playing the Heat first round, if they're at full strength.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. So we're going to dive into the Heat, right?
Yeah.
And maybe this is a good segue to start that, because this is what I kind of thought about around this is the Heat are probably, I think people are kind of accepting that there's a good chance they'll be the top seed.
Yep.
And I mean, the Brooklyn were leading the East early on in the season, but probably after sort of 20 or 30 games, Miami took that lead and have pretty much been there since. And so will be a deserved first seed. And their reward, and they've done it with a bunch of injuries, like they haven't been full strength the whole season. Like, so you got to give them credit. Like they've really managed they've managed the sort of injuries a lot better than the other teams.
Yep.
First seed, there's a hell of a chance that their reward for first seed is a fully fit, full strength Brooklyn Nets team.
Yeah.
That is like fucked. Like that would have to be the best 8 seed team in history. Like if they're
Probably.
full strength and everything.
It's a weird.
And I think they're not favourites for that series if the Nets are full strength.
And probably the first time in history in any sport where the first seed plays the 8th seed and is the underdog.
No, it is a weird one. I mean, like going back to the Nets just before we dive completely into Miami, they have been one of the most frustrating teams to watch this year, especially. Injuries, Kyrie Irving, everything that's happening, that 11-12 game skid that they went on. They can somehow go into Milwaukee, beat a Bucks team with no KD, no Joe Harris, no Ben Simmons, but then they get stomped by almost 40 points at home against a Raptors team. But then tonight they're playing and currently they're up by 8 against the Raptors. Like it is just seesaw so much. It's so frustrating.
Yeah. I mean, it's been a weird run. I've watched way too much basketball that James Johnson has played.
I think it just shows you, just like basketball and baseball's the same thing as well. Like compared to football, where like I feel like in football, like every game matters. Like losing a game, it's you can just have those off nights, and like you kind of probably once you realize that you're down by 20 in the just after the early in the second quarter, you probably do sort of switch it off a little bit, and because it's an 82 game season, that
you've got
this isn't must win.
Yeah.
So and that's what makes playoffs so good, because I think the energy and everything sort of lifts the level. And as a fan, in terms of like paying to go to a game, like that's you can sense that sort of added sort of intensity.
Yep. Yeah, and 7 game series are brilliant as well. You really get you really see who's the best team come out in those. So let's go deeper into the Heat. We'll also talk about the Suns as the first deep dive. Kind of want to go into sort of the strengths and weaknesses of these teams over the next few weeks. Obviously, we've picked the top 2 teams in each conference, so there's probably not going to be tons of weaknesses there. But we'll start with the Heat. So they're 41-21 as we record this. Starting lineup: Jimmy Butler, Duncan Robinson, Kyle Lowry, PJ Tucker, and Bam Adebayo. And they've got Victor Oladipo. On the way back, they've got Tyler Hero, who's one of the best
sixth man of the year, probably
in the league. This is a good deep roster. There's a lot to like. Obviously, the top, but there's a lot to like here.
Yeah, totally. And I'm going to the game at Barclays on Thursday US time to watch them take on the Nets. Hopefully, KD's back for that. They're a lot of fun though. Obviously, when they're not playing the Nets. They've won 9 out of the last 10. The only game they dropped out of that was to the Mavs when they lost 107-99. Mavs have obviously been great as well. Like you said, their lineup's fantastic. They've got depth on the bench. Oladipo's back. Like Oladipo's problem is like staying healthy. On the last 4 seasons, he's played like 88 games total. But having him on the bench and coming through, that's a great addition to that team, because it gives Butler or Robinson or whoever, it gives one of these guys, time off. And their strength of schedule remaining is not the hardest at all. They've got a pretty easy strength of schedule. They totally end up in first place. Like you said, their reward is probably going up against, potentially Nets.
They're probably going up against a strong team anyway, just because of the playing teams that we've talked about. Even if it's not the
Nets or Boston,
it's going to be a tricky opponent.
Not necessarily, because they'll play the 8th seed from the plan, so they'll play the 2nd seed from the plan. So I think there's a good chance the Nets, if the Nets finish 7th or 8th, I reckon they'll probably win that game and be the 7th seed.
But they're still probably playing the Celtics or potentially the Bucks, if your prediction comes true, which is not an easy
or it might be the Raptors, or someone like that, or the Hawks or Hornets. So, but yeah, it could be. For me, obviously Nets dependent. They're my pick to go to the finals. I think if the Nets season continues to stutter and Kyrie doesn't come back, I think this Heat side, and it's not really a hot take given their first, but I think they're the most complete side. I think they've probably sustained. I think we talked about like the peaks and troughs of a lot of the other teams over the season. I think the Heat have probably been the most stable, just very good.
Yeah,
throughout.
Yep.
And that's the thing they've had injuries throughout the year, and they've managed to stay. Definitely been one of the more consistent teams throughout.
Their coach has been there before, so they'll they've got a lot of experienced players, so they'll know how to sort of manage their workload leading into the playoffs. And I look at like someone like the Cavs and all their young players. I wonder if they're going to be a bit burnt out by the playoffs. Where I think the Heat, will be. Know how to manage workloads going.
Yeah, they've got a real good mix, a real good balance to their side. And I really hated him last year in playing for the Bucks, but PJ Tucker's just a real good, like sort of hard man, hard nosed, sort of in your face sort of player that I think complements the rest of the sort of more star power that they've got in that same line.
Yeah. I think it's
which I think is important in a lot of teams, having that sort of niggly player.
Yeah, there was the Heat again, like have definitely had like their like slight slump where they lost those 2 games against the Raptors, lost against Boston, kind of in Jan, early Feb. But like outside of that, they've been like pretty good. Well, obviously with their record, but the teams that they're losing to are kind of not teams that kind of set off any alarm bells. It's like the Nuggets or Cleveland or Milwaukee or Memphis, like when they were going through
their
weird slumps.
You lose to the Bucks on the second of a back-to-back. That's tough.
Yeah. I mean, like, this I don't know if this is a hot take. I don't see them beating out some of these teams in the East.
Over 7 games?
No, over 7 games. Like, I don't know if they could take the Bulls over 7.
Not many can take them. So.
Set this up for some shitty chat.
Like even if it got to that point, like, and same with probably like a team like, I know we were shitting on the Bucks with their strength of schedule, but like the Bucks in Milwaukee is like tough work.
Yeah.
I do like the Heat though. Like, and I mean, like we're 2 years removed from the Heat being in the finals against the Lakers in the bubble.
Butler was strong that season. That was the bubble, right?
Yeah. And Butler like was amazing.
He it felt like it was kind of all on his shoulders. Like when he didn't play well, they just got absolutely destroyed.
Yeah, and like I mean, like PJ Tucker's on the team this year. He was obviously at the Bucks last year. Like
that's what I was sort of saying. Like it brings like that sort of what it takes type attitude. And I mean I think they're definitely as we've said, like not really a hot take, but I think they deserve the one spot they've got. They're likely to stay there.
I actually think like that what it takes stuff is probably the most important in the NBA across all the American sports, because I always watched like LeBron and all these stars over the years. Like they always knew how to ramp things up at the business end of the season, and I think there's guys on the Heat who will know how to do that as well. And their coach knows how to do that and manage them that way. And I think that goes a long way in the NBA.
And compared to, as you said, Cleveland's one that you could compare that might not have that. Chicago's probably arguably another one that, can you remember Chicago being deep in playoff contention in, the recent sort of last decade? So, there's while they might not be as young as the Cavaliers in terms of the squad, the key players, but, they're also kind of pretty raw when it comes to that sort of big match experience. So
I think the other thing as well, and like I'm definitely going to talk to this once we jump into the Suns as well, is that consistency at an organization level where you've got a coach that has been there for a while that is building something good. Like they've got the same coach that was there when LeBron and the super team were there, and that's got to mean something. And, like, I know we'll talk about the Suns in a bit, but like that helps to build culture and consistency. They've got, like you rightly said, Si, like when we were talking earlier, like the players on that team are great. Like they all have depth, on the bench. They've got some guys that can come in and do it. They've got Oladipo pretty much coming back fairly soon. Like Jay Crowder's obviously there, and he's a scrappy guy as well, along with PJ Tucker. Like that's definitely a team that could go through.
Yeah, for sure. I could see them going back to the finals.
Is this Suns?
The Heat.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. I can see them going back to the Eastern finals.
Heat Suns final, which two teams that have lost the last two is not.
Yeah, I can see
not
them
out of the
going,
realms of possibility.
I see them going to the Eastern finals, but I think like again, like the Eastern final, like the Eastern playoffs is going to be tough.
Yeah. The Eastern playoffs are going to be a crapshoot.
It's going to be a meat grinder. Like
I think there's a lot of sort of teams that are probably not as good as Phoenix at full strength, but are sort of right up there. So yeah, I think it's going to be a heck of a lot of fun to watch. But anyway, let's talk about Phoenix. So they're an interesting one as well, actually, because they're 49-12 now. As we talk about this, they lost 2 in a row now without Chris Paul to the Pelicans and Jazz. They're actually playing the Heat next week, so that'll be a good measure of how they're going. And 7 of their next 11 are against losing teams. So I think they've got a pretty good run into. They've got a 6-game lead on the Warriors as well. So 7 of the next 11 against losing teams with a 6-game lead on the Warriors for the first seed. I think they've got even without Chris Paul, they're looking pretty safe.
I think as a coach and an organization, they've got to be targeting, winning a big portion of those games.
Sure.
They can, try and make that easier into the run-in.
Yeah, you probably know you're going to drop a few games, and they probably wouldn't usually expect to lose to the Pelicans, but without Paul, so you might drop a few, but if you just win enough, you can handle it. But let's look at their starting lineup. So currently they've got Cameron Payne, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, DeAndre Ayton, and obviously Chris Paul to come back. I think
they got Drew Holiday's brothers on the bench, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not quite as good, but
decent.
They had a decent from going to the game. They had quite a good. It was pretty much like the whole starting lineup would go off together. It's like they had a second 5.
Yeah.
And some teams do that, but it was, I think maybe the only crossover may have been Chris Paul for a period, but then he went off and then it was completely new 5.
Yeah.
And then maybe like Booker comes back in and with the second 5 and then the rest come out. It was most of the time that like say Booker and Paul were on was with Crowder, was with Aiden and Bridges. Like it was very much a starting 5, second 5 was kind of interesting like tactics and way of doing things.
I think Paul's the key for them going deep, because I think without him they've got enough depth to probably get through. If they play first be 8th, I think they can get through that without Paul. But I think beyond that, I think it becomes a bit tricky, because I think without Paul it sort of drops them down to a team that I could see the Jazz or the Grizzlies or even the Mavs toppling in a best of 7,
especially in a physical sort of.
And so Paul's due back. He's due to be reevaluated. It was 6 to 8 weeks, so 5 to 7, I guess now. But that's just before the playoffs. And so if there's any complications, and us as Nets fans with Joe Harris, we know a fair bit about complications with injuries. But if there's any complications and he's out a little bit longer, then I think the lack of Paul would drop them from being, I think, clear favourite to win the West to a team that is probably just in the mix with the Grizzlies and the Jazz.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think the Suns are an interesting team. I think what Monty Williams has done, who's the coach of the Suns, and what he's built there, is amazing. Like you would have seen it when you went there, right? Like they're all doing their handshakes and stuff, before they even come out onto the court. And
it was off camera.
It
was. I guess they might know it was on camera because it was on the monitors around the stadium. But they were all kind of bro shaking and they definitely look like there's good sort of morale amongst the squad.
Well, they've definitely built that in. And I think we always talk about culture at sports teams, but I think what the Suns have built is definitely something else. Going out of that tough loss last year, Monty Williams had his head up high. He walked into the locker room, congratulated, the Bucks team. But I think it's incredibly special when teams are able to pull that off. It feels like watching the Suns, it's a team effort as well. Every time you watch them, it's not like, Okay, like, it's not like when you used to watch the Nets or something like that and James Harden was on the court and it felt like the James Harden show the entire time. It felt like whether it's like Aiden or Booker or Paul, like they're constantly sharing the ball around. They're all having great games, but they're definitely out there. And
you do see that. You look at the stat lines after games, and often you'll see all the starters with at least 10 points.
Yeah.
A bunch of them with 20. Like it's not necessarily not like some of the other teams where like Ja Morant's getting 50 points or 45. It's a more even split, which says the team. Clearly Booker is the star, but I feel like I completely agree. I think it is definitely strength of the full team that kind of makes them dangerous.
Well, obviously Paul's a veteran they've brought in as a star, but it sort of speaks to the fact that they've built this team up together. And there's not, they haven't done what the Nets did, which was build up a bunch of players and then traded them all for established stars. They've sort of built this team up. And I guess when players get drafted in there and see a team come from being basement dwellers up to being a title contender and going to the finals, and that sort of, that in itself just breeds the culture.
Yeah. Yep. It's kind of got that good, nice mix of younger players there, and then kind of a bunch of those older veterans, which I think is obviously important.
You say the same. The Grizzlies are doing the same. They look like a super fun team to play for.
I think when I think of the Suns here, like what are they gonna? I think for me the big thing will be, you talk about Chris Paul coming back and 100%. That's obviously key, but it's just, does he come back and he's straight into it? And because often it can take time to get back into your sort of mojo, not just as an individual in Paul, but like as the team. And so you, let's say he comes back and it's game 4 in a series and it's 2-1, like that, where it's a pretty essential game to the series. And so there's that dynamic which is going to be interesting to see when it comes to that sort of playoff.
I think as well, like with Chris Paul, like you're right. If you've got a Chris Paul that's coming back from like a massive injury and like struggling to get back in the rhythm, that obviously changes things. But if you've got a rested, healthy Chris Paul coming back just in time for the playoffs, like that's scary as shit. Because obviously he's had some pretty bad runs in the past, like with his health as it got to playoff time. So I think resting what is Chris Paul, 36? Yeah, 36-year-old player, like just before playoffs isn't a bad thing.
I mean, that's what Devin Booker, it was in the All-Star like weekend, and they asked sort of a media journalist asked him like what his take is on the injury, because it was obviously fresh news at the time, and it was exactly that response, like gives the old boy like 6 weeks off to recover and sort of rest up and come back firing for the playoffs. It sounds ideal.
I think the only thing that scares me about the Suns is obviously they either go up against the Warriors or probably the Grizzlies. Like, I mean, like the West as well is like pretty tough. Like, and if you look at it, and Draymond Green's going to come back for the Warriors, like that series is going to be interesting as hell. And they've got a game coming up actually where they're playing the Warriors, so it's going to be a potential great, West Finals preview if Draymond Green's back.
I just feel like in the West, there's like the Suns and the Warriors are just a cut above the rest.
Yeah, I mean the thing that's going to not.
If Nuggets get full strength,
Nuggets will be interesting, yeah, for sure. But I think as well, like the Suns, their remaining schedules like a bit easier than a couple of others in the West. So like they're not going to slip out of first place, I don't think, based on that. Now, like looking at its strength of schedule, but a lot of those teams are going to be, hard to go up against. Warriors, Grizzlies, Mavs, Nuggets, with Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray potentially coming back. But again, like those are big injuries, and those guys are coming back from as well. So we'll see.
Suns and Heat, 2 real contenders.
Yeah.
So we'll do this again next week. What we'll probably do, probably the Warriors and the Bulls.
Warriors and Bulls.
We'll do the next 2. So we'll have a DeMar DeRozan.
We could probably just do the whole pod on DeMar DeRozan. I'd say, just on that, it'd probably be between him and Ja Morant for like just the most exciting player to watch this season. Selfishly,
how many Bulls games have you watched this year, man?
Not many, mate. Just the highlights. Just the highlights.
I mean, like,
just the highlights.
Speaking of
I'm just thinking
Ja
of-
Morant, it feels like every Grizzlies game there's like a viral clip about.
Yeah,
something.
that's what I'm going it off. DeRozan had he has his buzzer beaters and these amazing moments. Ja Morant's just doing
Did
these
you-
like 360-degree.
Correct.
Yeah, the quarterback pass from Steven Adams.
The Grizzlies are having what the Suns had last year, which is nobody's super talking about them a lot over here, apart from showing some of those highlights of Ja Morant.
But it's not really about the team. It's about Ja Morant. Just
No
doing
one
his
knows-
free.
Yeah.
no one talks
Yeah.
about anyone else.
It's just your classic like ESPN top 10, and he's on
Yeah,
it every
And
week.
before that 52-point game, I was reading an article, I think it was on ESPN, where they were calling Ja Morant overhyped. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. But
yeah. Well, we might talk NFL free agency next, but we might take a little toilet break and watch the end of the Nets game.
Yeah.
So we'll be back shortly. Okay. Well, we're back. We just watched the Nets. Brief hiatus. Just watched the Nets blow it. 1 point loss to Toronto. Back-to-back losses to Toronto. So
great.
we're in good spirits as we tackle the fourth topic. So we're going to look move away from the NBA, go to the NFL now, and look ahead to the off season.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the free agency market's like kind of mediocre. There's a few
Yeah.
good names there. Devontae Adams, big one from Green Bay. Chris Godwin,
Juju Smith-Schuster.
Juju, Odell Beckham.
Yep.
He'll come back somewhere
Jesse-
mid-season maybe.
Jesse Bates.
Jesse Bates.
Who the fuck is Jesse Bates?
Yeah, who the fuck? Yeah,
Look him up. I think he's the safety for Cincinnati.
like a long snapper or something.
You fucking just side eye.
Um,
and what's interesting as
The
well.
big stories are going to be the trades.
Oh
obviously.
yeah, totally. And
You don't talk defense unless it's like TJ Watt or Aaron.
Oh,
Donald. They're not
correct.
really.
Yeah, nobody really
Aaron
knows
Donald,
Steve.
the greatest defender. Yeah.
But yeah, like it's interesting with a whole bunch of these like free agents, and I say that with like bunny ears because with the Devontae Adams and Godwin actually hit free agency or their franchise tag is another conversation. But I think they're like, you're right. The trade potential is still there for a lot of teams. I think, there's been a lot of noise around like players like Kyler Murray, for instance, where it's like, does he retire? Like, does he go to baseball? Like, does he demand a trade from like the Cardinals? Absolutely not. Like, it's all just noise and games at the moment. It's agent games.
But also, all he said was he wants a long-term contract and a competitive team. Who doesn't want that?
Correct.
I mean, it's not anything. I mean, it doesn't mean he's going to get it, but it's like it's not said anything outrageous.
No, and it's interesting
No,
as
but
well.
is it? Are you meant to read between the lines? Is it like a dig that the team around him isn't a contender, or isn't
Yeah, I don't know.
what
So
he's wanting?
he was pretty
Is
frustrated.
that what people would be reading into by
Probably.
releasing it?
Yeah.
That's the point.
Yeah.
I mean, like his agent's wanting him to get a long-term deal, and like looking at players in their like the same year as Kyler Murray, like before they're actually finished their rookie contract, that got extensions. You're talking about your Josh Allens, your Patrick Mahomes, probably on
Dak
the like,
Prescott is a year or so before that.
yeah, like probably like the good contracts that worked out well, but then you've also got the Carson Wentz and Jared Goffs. And I think from an organizational point of view, you're probably like, is this guy our future? The answer is probably yes. Like Kyler Murray is
But
a good
still
quarterback.
a probably thing.
Yeah, but still a probably
Yeah.
because like, I mean, like Carson Wentz looked fucking lights out. Jared Goff looked great as well. And then they just absolutely went downhill in the shit. And then like, they,
I
Because
think
if he
shortly
wants
after they signed these 140.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If he wants
contracts.
a long-term contract, he's wanting 200 million plus, right?
yeah.
And so
easy.
the Cardinals are well within their rights to be like, well, we probably haven't quite seen enough from you yet
Look, I
to say that we want to commit that.
I mean, the GM, I think it was either the GM or the owner of the Cardinals came out today and was basically like, totally respect Kyler Murray's agent. This is the game, though. Like, this is agent talk. Like, there's nothing, and it was basically like, everyone needs to chill out. Like, we haven't had any, like,
Meaningful chat.
well, not even, it's that. Like, they've maybe had some slight chat, but they haven't had any, like, alarm bell ringing chat,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, whatever, let's just watch and see where it goes. I imagine they get an extension done
that
before
agent, that agent would love a big fat
Ah,
commission
exactly.
on a long-term extension.
I think like kind of when we're talking about quarterbacks as well, like there's obviously a whole bunch of games when it happens when a quarterback is coming up to, getting off their rookie contract and things like that. I mean, he's on $5.4 million. It's a lot of money, but it's probably not a lot of money in like a quarterback
Not
world.
a star quarterback.
No. So he'll get a lot of money, but it's not. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the length of the contract and the money that's guaranteed with it.
Yeah. So what the big one's Aaron Rodgers, really. That's the one everyone's sort of talking about. What where do you think? Where do you see that heading at the moment?
Well, it was interesting. Like, I remember when we talked about this probably once the Packers got knocked out by the 49ers in the playoffs, and I was like, there's no way Aaron Rodgers returns to Green Bay. And I was like very adamant about that. But they're actually making all the right moves. They're freeing up a lot of cap space. They're bringing in personnel that have worked closely with Rodgers in the past that he's liked before. So if they were like, we're still kind of at the same point where we were, like a month ago, which is he could retire. He could demand a trade, but now there's, I think, a small percentage that he actually does return to the Packers. And then they franchise tag Adams as well.
Yeah.
Whether they can do all that and keep all their personnel and re-sign everyone and kind of still have this, like, still have enough cap space, I don't know. Like the Rams did some ridiculous magic with their cap space, obviously, when they went in all in.
I think hot take.
Give me your hot take.
Red zero on this. It's just pure instinct.
As per, yeah.
Rodgers is playing for the Packers again this year. Adams is playing for the Packers. Randall Cobb will be released. He'll be one of the guys they get rid of to sort of free up space.
Wasn't he one of the guys though that
he likes him?
Yeah,
he does like him, but I just don't think they can keep everyone.
No, but wasn't Cobb only on a 1-year deal, or maybe I'm wrong?
Well, they get what are you saying? He's free agent now.
Well,
no.
So like the Packers' problem, right, is going to be like.
Well, no, I just don't think I'll be able to like what his salary. I don't think I'd want to.
No, I mean, like Rodgers is getting what he is. I mean, like if you're going to buy into what the media is saying at the moment, the chat is Rodgers doesn't give a shit about the money, but then there's also this other chat that he very much does give a shit about the money, and he wants to be paid the highest quarterback in the NFL. He's still on contract with the Packers for this year, though. He's going to, maybe he could trade him. Their GM said that they've received 0 calls asking about Aaron Rodgers and an Aaron Rodgers trade. I don't know if I buy into any of this. I'm actually kind of fucking sick of the whole Aaron Rodgers thing. I just want to fast forward 2 months and see where it is. Because I feel like correct. Because there's part of him, right, where he's playing into this a lot, where he's like, yeah, people are talking about me. I'm building my brand, all that kind of shit. Let's just move on because, not us on the topic, but let's just move on from Aaron Rodgers.
Because he can leverage the Packers into doing more.
But I know, because you this is one of your, 5 or 6 teams. Broncos. I did hear, must have been on SportsCenter on the weekend, and since Peyton Manning retired, so what was that, like maybe 14 or 15, probably when they won the Super Bowl. I think they said something like there's been 10 or 11 quarterbacks used. Oh,
they've been terrible. They've had Paxton Lynch. They had what was the guy that?
The point is we don't know the guy's names. I think that's part of it.
Yeah, well, he went to the Texans. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he basically had a tattoo that he got on him that was spelt completely incorrectly.
But
yes, Osweiler. Is it Osweiler?
Ozstriker from American Pie. Yeah. So the point is they're a team that's, and they've got Elway is involved in the organization. They've been screaming for a quarterback that they could really get around. They were hoping it was Drew Lock.
They're hoping as a whole bunch of guys.
I know, but I think they really sort of thought they had the guy with Drew Lock, who's probably could still be a good player, but so I mean, they're a definite candidate for where Rodgers, if he was to get traded out or go elsewhere, that's I think, and you've sort of mentioned that previously. I think that's definitely a chance, because I think the Broncos would move a lot of pieces they had to kind of get someone of that.
Yeah,
Is there any what's the problem with just running it back again? And if Rodgers wants to stay, putting that team.
I think that's realistically what they're looking to do.
That team was good enough to win a Super Bowl, I think.
They're good enough to be the best team in the regular season.
They were the best team in the regular season. Obviously, there's huge question marks over Rodgers in the postseason. But honestly, you put that team again and roll the dice again with that team. I think most people are taking that.
I mean, 1 more year old Aaron Rodgers is coming off an MVP season. Like, you know, Brady, you know, played obviously old as well. Like, there's something to be said with playing your entire career with a team and retiring with that team.
Yeah.
You know, obviously Brett Favre didn't do that. He was the quarterback before him because he went and the Jets.
Jets, right, yeah.
And so I think like there's something to be said in that. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see, I think, where it ends up. But like, I don't want to live and breathe. Like, I mean, I watched the Pat McAfee show on YouTube last week because Aaron Rodgers goes on every Tuesday. So I was watching the live stream and he immediately was like, just so everyone knows there's going to be no news today, but we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the thing you say about like playing for one team, there's also a lot to be said for winning titles. And when you're 38, if you don't feel like you can do it with your current team, you're going to try and
one Super Bowl. That's all he fucking got at Green Bay, which is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. So I can.
The most ridiculous of that is because when I think of the Packers, in my mind, they seem to go 13-3 like every year.
They always seem to be good.
It's always that the amount of, I think Matt LaFleur, the coach, is the record has the best start to, like, you know, the first 4 seasons or 3 seasons as a coach, the most wins in that stretch, and it's because they're winning 12, 13 games every year. Like, so yeah, I mean that's the big thing. It's not that Rodgers has just won Super Bowl. It's they've been one of the elite teams. To win 13 games in an NFL regular season is very difficult.
You'll like this. They've actually gone 13-3 the last 3 seasons in a row.
They must have gone 13-4 this year though, because there was 17 games.
Oh, they must have, yeah. But
they had 13 wins.
If 13 wins the last.
In my head, that's just 13-3.
Yeah, it's pretty funny.
I mean, like the thing is,
that's Rodgers' record. So
because he didn't play.
He missed one. Yeah, he missed one game. So he's been 13-3. The team's not. But the other 2 seasons, the team was also because he played all 16.
And I mean, Rodgers is a good quarterback. The obvious like example that like springs to mind, right? If you're listening to this and you're like, the Rams just did this with a Matt Stafford. What makes this Packers team different? For the defense, for one. Like, I mean, you've got Aaron Donald, you've got Ramsey, you've got a whole bunch of other guys on that defense at like the Rams. You know, the Packers defense is pretty middle of the road. You know, they have a bunch of contracts that they need to sort out on the defense to keep that team together as well. And then like on the offense, they got Devontae Adams, who's amazing. Like, he's incredible. He's probably one of the, you know, top 3 wide receivers in the league next year for sure, if Rodgers is there. But like outside of that, you still got problems.
Aaron Jones is good. It's just they've got a good 1-2 punch in the backfield, but the problem is Aaron Jones is starting to get kind of similar to Zeke, where there's been a few injuries that I feel is maybe reducing his effectiveness. But I think in Dillon, they've got as good as any team's like backup running back.
I mean, like,
so there's strength there.
Yeah, the Packers need help at tight end, and they need some more help, you know, at wide receiver. And like, again, like looking back, it's an organizational problem. They should not have taken Jordan Love when they did. Hindsight's obviously
interestingly though, the wide. I haven't done heaps of looking into this, but my understanding is the wide receiver pool within this year's draft's decent. And when you think of like the last few years, some of the rookies that have come through, like Jefferson and Jamar Chase,
it is not as strong.
It's probably not as strong as that, but there is definitely some wide receivers out there. That what I'm getting at is there's probably a first round or second round wide receiver, you know, in the mix that you'd hope could kind of try and be impactful in that first season.
I would like to hope so, but again, like, I mean, these Justin Jeffersons, like all those guys, like Jamar Chase, like they are exceptions to the rule. They're not like Devontae Smith's. It's not a regular occurrence. And you know, but like there's a whole bunch of this shit going on with quarterbacks. Like we've got Russell Wilson, I don't think is likely to move at all from Seattle.
Well, this is what my question was going to be. Like, who's a left field sort of like, if there's a surprise trade, not necessarily a surprise. Like I would put a Russell Wilson trade in this. What I'm trying to say is there like one that's a little bit where you're like, wow, okay, that happened. I like a Russell Wilson, or is it like Kyler Murray? Obviously, I certainly don't think that's happening. But
I was thinking about this earlier today.
Was it like a Saquon Barkley getting moved from the Giants?
So we'll touch on the Giants in a second because I think it's another conversation. I think if we're talking about just quarterbacks, what Deshaun Watson's got to move. He's obviously going, so like he's got to go somewhere. In my head, that's not surprising because he obviously sat out the entire year last season. I think what would be surprising is if he does or doesn't play because of all the sexual assault allegations and things like that and his legal stuff. So ignoring that,
Zeke Elliott had got that 6-match ban a few years back, like which completely derailed the Cowboys season, and that was from a domestic abuse. You know, I bet up his girlfriend sort of I don't think it was innocent, but it was like the NFL kind of did an independent thing and suspended him for 6 weeks. Cops did nothing. So that was interesting. So I'd be very surprised if
quite often the league suspends players.
Correct. So I guess my point is like what Zeke did, like was a domestic. I think it came down to an allegation. Like it was proven that he was probably like not so much in the wrong that he was suspended, but yeah, I think what Deshaun Watson's facing is far worse than potentially what Zeke was, and Zeke had a 6-match suspension. So I think the NFL will definitely.
Well, I'm definitely not going to get into like what is worse, not worse over that because I think they're all.
Well, I just think this guy shouldn't play again. But the reality is, like,
Deshaun Watson's moving. Like
owners are going to trade for a guy like Deshaun Watson.
Yeah, 100%.
So good.
I think.
Where does he end up then?
Oh,
I like. Are the Bucks a big player? Can they make the?
Maybe I don't know. Like Eagles make most sense in my head, to be honest, or the Dolphins.
Pittsburgh?
Tua.
So this was going to be when you asked
Tua goes to Houston.
Yeah, I think so. I think when you ask the question, what is the most surprising one? In my head, it's probably one that's surprising but realistic. The Steelers either trading for Kirk Cousins from the Vikings, who's on his final year of the contract there, or potentially grabbing Jimmy G. I don't know if that solves things for them. And I mean, Jimmy G
makes them probably a solid team, but it doesn't. I don't think it solves anything for them.
I think in my head, Wilson's staying, Watson is moving. So I'd be kind of keeping an eye. Washington, the Commanders is probably another destination that Watson could move to. But I would say Watson wants to go to a team where he has good offensive weapons. And, when you look at offensive weapons and teams that are quarterback hungry, it's the Broncos, the Eagles, and probably Washington with Terry McLaurin and Gibson in the backfield there. But yeah, so that's what I think for quarterback. I think a couple of the other ones that are kind of floating out there, you got Juju Smith-Schuster, who's a free agent.
Yeah.
I mean, wherever he goes. Well, I don't know. Like
he ain't helping any team win a title, in my opinion.
I think he does. He's a great slot receiver. I think playing with Ben Roethlisberger.
I wouldn't be like giving away a whole bunch to get him.
Well, he's a free agent. I don't have to give away anything. I just have to sign him up. He would do well on a couple of teams. I think.
I think he's likely to play, even if he didn't get snapped up early. I think there's injuries. There's always injuries, and when you've got someone that's proven, you're going to get picked up. I mean, obviously, before it showed the fan, Antonio Brown is an example of that, where he was actually pretty effective. He helped them win the Super Bowl, and then kind of went a bit off the rails. But like,
we were obviously talking about Kyler Murray before. If you've got DeAndre Hopkins and Juju Smith-Schuster on the team that's running, and Juju's running slot while DeAndre Hopkins is running down the sideline, that's great because then you've suddenly got Kyler who can run it. You've got their running back presence who is kind of hit and miss a lot of the time. And then you've got, what's his name? The ex-Eagles tight end. It's then you've got there are a whole bunch of teams that could
bit of a power couple. I think doesn't his missus play soccer?
She does.
Like
yes.
But I think else we've got potentially Carson Wentz on the move out of Indy. It sounds like they're kind of one and done with him. They gave up a first round pick to him because of the amount of games he played. And then they didn't make the playoffs, so that was a big thing. So
because if they were never going to make the playoffs, they would have benched him to kind of avoid that. But then they were on, and then they kind of capitulated and lost a bad game to get kicked out.
So where he ends up, Jimmy G's obviously being traded from San Francisco. I think from the wide receiver market, what I'm keeping an eye on is Amari Cooper from the Cowboys.
Bit of cheddar there, eh?
Yeah, he's owed $20 million, which is a lot of money.
I think he's going.
I think he has to go as well. It's just where he goes.
I think with
what.
CeeDee Lamb like really kind of emerging as probably your wide receiver one or coming through, like I think they'll get rid of him.
And I'd probably bring, and like Schultz at tight end. And then what's the guy that got injured towards the end of the year?
Gallup.
I'd probably look at bringing Gallup back on a cheaper thing. You're not going to have to pay him $20 million a year.
Yeah.
And he was really good at the Cowboys. So, and he knows the system. So
yeah, I think for sure. And he's had that bad injury, but agreed. I think it's Cooper that, who to be honest, he was pretty ineffective in Vegas or for the Raiders, and kind of when the Cowboys picked him up, and I think he really sort of increased his value at the Cowboys.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see where that heads up. I think
is there any running back sort of movements?
Well,
what about
potential? Yeah, well, it sounds like the Giants are potentially having a fire sale. They're ready to move on from a lot of their players. Saquon Barkley is on this coming season. He'll be on the last year of his contract. He's owed $7 million before he becomes a free agent, unrestricted free agent. So he can go wherever the hell they want. So basically, from the Giants' point of view, you've kind of been bullied into a position where you're kind of like, you re-sign him for a huge extension, knowing that he's been really injury prone over his career there.
Yeah.
You potentially see what happens at the season and let him walk for nothing, or you try trade him for maybe a second or third rounder.
But it's like, are the Giants in a position to be going places next season?
No. And then, so they won't resign him. So
yeah.
Basically, like,
is he a bust?
Fuck yeah! For where the Giants took him, absolutely.
Took him number 3, right?
Yeah, well, they didn't take a quarterback as well.
Oh, and yeah. So they took him over taking potential franchise.
I'm not denying Saquon Barkley is a hugely talented running back, and he was super hyped in that draft. Baker Mayfield, obviously, that year went number 1.
So is that the year that Josh Allen,
there's a 2018
Lamar
draft.
Jackson?
Yeah.
So they took
Josh
Mayfield
Rosen
went first,
Yep.
Saquon Barkley went second, then the Jets got Darnold, and then Josh Allen down at 7th.
Yeah, but
and then Lamar Jackson, I reckon, is 32nd maybe, or
Yeah, Lamar Jackson was 32nd.
I mean, like,
good knowledge.
ignoring that, like, there were some other like absolute studs in that draft where you look like.
Is Josh Rosen in there? He's a stud, eh? Josh Rosen doesn't he play for like 5 teams?
I actually think he was in that draft.
The Baltimore Ravens had a great draft. They got their quarterback Jackson at 32nd, and at 86th they got Mark Andrews. Their tight end.
The best tight end in the NFL last
tight
season.
end one in the
So
NFL.
what quarterbacks went after?
After the Giants pick.
Well, look, I mean, like,
look.
So what?
No, Darnold went immediately after. Then Josh Allen for the Bills, obviously he's the big one. Josh Rosen to the Cardinals.
Yeah, there you go. But that goes to prove it. So what the Giants did there, which is, and it is hard to sort of argue sometimes in the draft, is do you go for your absolute number 1 need, or do you go for the best player off on the board? That's normally probably a question when you've kind of got picked number 10 to 20. It's like, and the Cowboys in the last few seasons have gone number 1 player in the draft, and they picked up CeeDee Lamb and they picked up Micah Parsons in the first round.
Yeah,
and that's been a complete success. And that wasn't necessarily where they needed players the most, but they just went, okay, we're taking the best player that's on the board. And so, but I think again that's because they're in the positions around 10, 15. But if you're picking top 5, it's probably a different tactic.
And I mean, hindsight is always 2020 with drafts. I think looking back, because I think
Mark Andrews.
It's like
Chubb went in the second round.
Everyone passed on Jackson. 6 teams passed on Josh Allen, who I'm sure they would all.
Jackson was also like a Heisman winner as like a sophomore.
Was a Heisman Trophy winner,
as a kid. So,
but I'm sure. I mean, the Browns and the Jets would have loved to have taken Josh Allen with first or third.
Yeah.
And
I think everyone would have taken Josh Allen.
Denver and Indianapolis and the Giants. But yeah, hindsight is obviously 2020.
I mean, like, yeah, and definitely looking back, like, I mean, Saquon Barkley is definitely the Giants' worst draft mistake in at least the last 5 years.
Is it the problem with Josh Allen? I mean, 7th is still very impressive. Is it because he played in the Midwest? His college was Wyoming. Do colleges like that get less hype than someone like Saquon Barkley at Penn State, Baker Mayfield, Oklahoma, Darnold, USC? big colleges.
Absolutely.
To a little bit,
Absolutely.
to a certain extent. But remember, where did Carson Wentz come from? Wasn't he Nebraska or something like that?
No, Nebraska's still playing in like
Wyoming.
it's not Wyoming.
Conference. Yeah.
You don't have to have what size saying you don't have to have gone to like
He played
Alabama or Ohio State.
Well,
or
he played
Clemson.
it. He played at North Dakota State. Carson Wentz.
Yeah. And by all means, you can still make it. Like, end of the day, at some of these lesser schools, you can throw up, especially as a quarterback, you can throw some incredible stats and numbers.
And 7th overall is like still a very impressive place to be taken. But it's still, I mean, Josh Allen is the number 1 overall pick in hindsight. Based on, if you redrafted that draft, you're taking Josh Allen first overall.
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, like, hindsight's hard because, like, and it's interesting. And this is one of the things that's like kind of fun to go back through. Look at a draft from like 10 years ago and look at all the first rounders and then like see people in there that you're like, oh, any of these names I remember. And that's where you kind of start realizing how tough the draft is to nail, and teams that do nail it, like,
or how hard it is for like players with expectation, or the guys that have made that, they've clearly been selected that high because of either a combination of incredible performance at college level, maybe at the combine or in the bowl games. So it's a combination of those 3 things, and then to not be able to convert it, on the professional stage.
It's actually kind of funny, like, because I've gone back 10 years, and which is probably a pretty bad example because, like,
the number 1 picks are pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, like,
what's Miles? What's his name from Browns? He's number 1, isn't he?
Yeah, well, I mean, like the 2011 like draft: Cam Newton, Von Miller, AJ Green, Julio Jones, Tyron Smith, Eldon Smith, JJ Watt, Mike Pouncey. Like, I mean, like, you do have a look at the quarterbacks that are in that draft like 10 years ago that you just are not starting quarterbacks. Jake Locker went 8th to the Titans. Christian Ponder went 12th to the Vikings. Who else have we got in here in that first round? Yeah. Colin Kaepernick went in the 2nd round to the 49th. Like, I mean, like, it shows, like, the only quarterback whose name in there that, was a thing up until last year was really Cam Newton. Like, the rest of the guys are backups, like, or not even in the league anymore. So it really shows how hard it is to kind of hit it.
It's hard. We've gone throughout the NFL off season to the 2010 draft.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the funnest things is actually looking back at old drafts.
I like it, and I think it's
Jonathan Taylor went 41st overall.
Yeah, and it's an important thing.
The Jonathan Taylor is a good example of probably what happened with Saquon Barkley. It's very rare now to see running backs because of their the lack of longevity. Teams don't want to pick running backs, and so I think in the most recent one, Najee Harris might have been the top.
Yep.
Or was it Travis Etienne?
No, it was Najee, I think.
Najee was the only first round running back.
24th.
And then Travis Etienne went like 33rd or whatever
Etienne went straight after Harris.
Oh, okay. Oh, did they have more than one pick? They obviously had more than one first round pick because
which was an awful pick for the Jags.
And then those are the only 2 running backs.
They weirdly did that because I don't know if they did that, but like they're both Clemson, like him and Trevor Lawrence would be mates and familiar with each other, but probably less important to be familiar with the running back versus a wide receiver.
And this is the thing, right? When you're talking about like those players, like if Rodgers did get traded, what's his worth? It's probably a shit ton of first rounders because like when you have a look back at some of these drafts, like striking gold is really hard.
And a proven commodity is like, you're right. It's like so much more valuable than you mean, and you've got a good chance of getting a Joe Burrow or a Jamar Chase or, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, or whoever. But like, you also might not.
Yeah.
And you might just waste that pick. And so if you can get Rodgers for a couple of first rounders, I'd say pull the trigger.
Exactly. And to have like a 2-3 year window of being really competitive. And
know that you've got an elite.
LA Rams is absolute
exactly.
Well, the other thing is, like, I'm not a huge fan of Lamar Jackson, but is Lamar Jackson worth a huge contract extension because you've got a guy that can compete? Absolutely, because imagine if you were like, oh, I'm just going to enter a draft and drafted Josh Rosen, and they're just absolutely trash, and you got nothing for your player that could actually, help you be competitive.
If your team is on the brink of contention, I'm all in on the camp where you should just put all your draft picks into making that team better.
Yep.
Because proven commodities are just so much better than draft picks.
Yep, absolutely.
In all of the major sports. But yeah, so NFL, it's going to be fun. I think it's going to be an interesting one. There's a few storylines there.
Yep.
A little bit in free agency, a little bit in the trade market. Well, let's quickly wrap it up with our bets for the week. So we will not. Pee. Yeah. But let's look ahead to our bets for the weekend. Thwaites, I'll give you a brief chance to do a little victory there after your multi came in.
Oh, and boy, did it. And it was kind of funny as well because I sat there and I thought the Knicks actually came back against the Heat to come within 5, but I read the score wrong. And then Sai, when he was doing our graphics, you put it up and thought the score wrong was as well, but my bet absolutely came in because they won by 15.
Read it as 115, 110, but it was actually 115, 100. So you came because you came.
Weird.
No pun intended.
You had Miami -6. So
yeah, so the multi came in. So I've now had 2 multis come in, which is great over however long we've been doing it. So we need to go back and check how many units we're up as well, because I feel like
I'm down. We're
down.
down.
You're definitely down, Dave.
You're down because you haven't come in yet.
You're up, Si, because I feel like we're now aligned. Even though I've had 2 multis come in, I feel like
I've only had one, but it was quite a big one.
Yeah,
it's
correct.
like an $18 odds sort of deal, so that sort of paid for half the year, just about.
Yeah,
I actually find NBA is a sport best to avoid at the best of times.
It's hard.
And I think it's just because it's one of those things where there's just so many games, and like I think I backed Timberwolves to cover the line.
Oh,
and they got beaten by and the line was -3 or something, and they got beaten by 25. And it's just like I've actually been watching Timberwolves a fair bit, and like the way they're looking and thinking they'll be right, but
the regular season NBA
it's just
really hard.
And it's like the Nets losing to the Raptors yesterday by like 40 or whatever.
No, but the problem is like, and that's why like NBA, you're only really betting on the day of. And I think like, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, but I think you've just got to look for the right bets. And it's like, is that team coming off back-to-back games? And we spoke about this earlier. Like, are they going back-to-back? Who's playing? Like, who's been banged up? Like, all that kind of shit. Like,
the bookies are aware of that as well. And odds are generally reflecting that.
Yeah. But there's a few good games this weekend. So, if, start Thursday, say, Grizzlies Celtics, Heat and Nets, Warriors Mavs on Thursday. Yeah, I quite like the Grizzlies against the Celtics, depending on what the line's looking like there. I think, as we talked about earlier in the show, I think the Celtics may be coming slightly down from their really high spell that they were going on for the last few weeks, where they won 9-10. So I think the Grizzlies are a good chance there. Morant's obviously playing unbelievably well there, so potentially some good odds there. You look at the Nets Heat even, and the Nets are back at home. It's probably going to be KD's first game back in a while. I think the Nets are probably, they're a good shout there. I think KD's, particularly on the back of back-to-back losses to Toronto, for the Nets, I can see them coming out pretty strongly, and with KD back, the fringe players being pretty hyped and everyone being pretty locked in against Miami. So I can see.
I think the Nets are value there on the
Nets are value there against the Heat.
Well, I think the Nets are value depending on what the line is.
Correct.
Because look, if the Nets are like heavy, like 8-point favorites, I'm going to take the Heat. Like if it,
no way they're going to be.
No, I imagine
even if KD's
like it'll be like a 2-point line, I think. But
I'm just saying, like they'll be value at a head-to-head. Even as slight favourites, I just think.
If KD's not playing, they'll be.
Do you think the Lakers, Clippers? Do you think? I feel like there's going to be a bit of value in the Lakers coming up.
I'm so over
I
the Lakers.
wouldn't.
I know they're so.
I keep thinking, the Lakers. The Lakers are going to finally hit their way at LeBron's and stuff.
And to be honest, I haven't looked at the odds with them.
So
Are they actually not heavy underdogs ever either because of
I mean, the Clippers don't. It's not like Clippers have Paul George or Kawhi, but like it's stay. This is a good rule in betting. Like, stay the fuck away from teams like the Lakers that are going through this dive, because like, yeah, they could come through, but you just want to avoid it. And a lot of the times, like, the Nets are a good team to avoid for betting as well, because it's like they never have consistent lineups, so they're really hard to bet for or against. So
Actually,
like
the most different starting lineups out of any NBA.
Yeah, I think where I'm thinking with the Lakers is they're starting to get to the desperation mode. Where it's
AD's not playing. They just cut what's his name, DeAndre Jordan, and they're like pulling like in two youngsters. Like,
they're starting to get to the desperation mode, and the 25 and 36 Pelicans hammered them.
Yeah, and they have the second hardest remaining schedule as well.
No,
like in the NBA.
I don't wear them.
I'm not going to the Lakers.
Look, I mean, like, the ones that I'm definitely looking at, I think
Friday's looking good.
Friday's good. The Cavs 76ers. I want to see how high Harden's line is, considering his form the last two games he played. So I definitely knew he was going to get over in the Friday's game. I posted it on our Instagram channel as well. I just couldn't bring myself to bet to it because I fucking hate
I'm wondering if his line gets a little bit inflated, but it's time for him to sort of drop down.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to look at, because the Cavs are pretty good on defense and stuff like that.
Harden's lines.
Yeah, so I'm definitely keeping that. There's a great matchup with the
Jared Allen's going to give Embiid a good challenge, in the paint. So
100%.
I like that.
So I'm keeping an eye on that. There's a great matchup between the Bucks and the Bulls on Friday as well. Saturday, the 76ers playing again. So it's a back-to-back game. And they're going up against the Heat. So definitely going to keep an eye against that as well.
Another one to going back to Friday, it's like they're playing Friday, then traveling down to Miami from Philly. So it's like, there's, they might be managing workloads a little bit. Yep. So Harden might have a fewer minutes. Yeah. So looking at that, there's potentially
and we've spoken about the
76ers.
Lack of depth.
Yeah.
So they can't really afford, if they want to be winning games, they probably can't afford Harden and Embiid to play less than 35.
Yeah.
So that's a real good hot take there.
This is where the money is, which I think is very interesting. And then me personally, and I know you guys are going to talk through your stuff, but Sunday has the Nets and the Celtics, which I think is going to be super interesting with Kyrie playing there.
Sorry, I'm parked up in front of the TV Sunday afternoon. Nets Celtics at 1 p.m. Suns Bucks 3:30 p.m.
Yeah.
Monday morning if you're in New Zealand. That's a beautiful schedule.
Totally. And that Nets game, that's Kyrie playing at the Celtics, where he's just going to get booed to shit. They absolutely hate him. KD's probably back at that point. I'm going to take the the Kyrie overs if it's around the 20-point mark, for him to just absolutely go nuts in Boston. But we'll see. And then, like you said, Suns Bucks game is going to be fun as hell.
Kyrie's playing excellent basketball, and it's getting a little bit of coverage, but it's going kind of under the radar because he's just not playing that often.
Yeah.
But when he plays, he's playing really, really well at the moment. That Bucks performance was excellent. I can't remember who they were playing before that. It might have been, one more before that, but I remember he put in another excellent performance. Yeah. When he's on the court, he's playing out of his.
Yep.
He's playing really well at the moment. So, and if he's got KD on the floor with him, I think the Nets are a really good shout in Boston on Sunday.
For sure. So each of those individual games I'll be looking at. So the Nets Celtics, the 76ers Heat, and then that Friday game with the 76ers as well against the Cavs. So I'm going to be taking a couple of bets on there, just on single game stuff. Obviously with the multis, I'm going to have to take 3 games on each night. So I'll have a look. We've obviously got the Warriors Lakers on Saturday as well, and a couple other things like that. But
Suns Bucks.
It is a frustrating thing when you should be able to cross over, at least kind of weekend stuff.
Or at least as the teams, if it's 2 different teams playing the next day, you should be able to look ahead.
Yeah, the Magic Grizzlies probably taking the Magic plus points on that. Be interesting if they're having to go, a couple of games close up. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. I think there's definitely money to be made on Kyrie's points over on Sunday, depending if it's around that 20 mark. I'd 100% jump on that. And then as well on the Saturday, I'm definitely looking at the Heat to smack the shit out of the 76ers. as the 76ers had that back-to-back. So those are probably like the anchors I'd put in.
On Saturday.
Yeah, the anchors I'd put in.
Timberwolves just beat the Warriors by 15 points tonight.
Yeah, Draymond Green's really
I picked the bloody wrong.
Well, this thing is, we talk about the Suns being, dropping down a tier without Chris Paul, but the Warriors dropped down a tier without Draymond Green as well.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't think
that really adds to what we were talking about earlier, where the Suns are going to look pretty likely to be that number one seed when Warriors are losing comfortably to a sort of.
It's a shame the what's it called? The Celtics ended up pulling back and beating the Hawks tonight as well, because I think you guys have hit the nail on the head though. I think most of the action is going to be in the NBA this weekend. May check out the golf. I haven't been very good on the picks, so take it with a grain of salt. I did couldn't bet on it in America, but I did pick Liverpool to beat Chelsea in penalties. So I've had a few little diamonds amongst, in terms of the picks.
Can't quite string three together.
Yeah, can't do it all.
You sound a bit deflated as you talk about it, mate.
Yeah, that's fine.
It was a good pick. The multi didn't come in.
Well, that would have been. What would that be? What do you reckon that would pay?
What, to pick?
Picking
11-10?
No, that's the team to. Oh. It was a team to win at shootout. To say it was going to go shootout and Liverpool to win.
Almost.
Maybe a touch more. Would have been good value.
Well, Liverpool, Chelsea, pretty even. So
yeah,
it draws quite good odds.
Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, it's sort of. I think with NBA, the last thing you're going to be doing, and we've established this pretty quickly, is making predictions. Like, we've got sort of ideas of what we're thinking is going to happen on the weekend, but we don't know whether they're going to can hold back KD for longer. We don't know. Exactly. If Giannis ends up not playing, that completely changes odds.
Jimmy Butler's ill, and then suddenly you're thinking the 76ers are a better shout. So we'll post our bets into the week on social media, as we always do. Sure. Any other tips? Should we wrap it up?
Wrap it up.
Yeah.
Beautiful. All right. Thanks so much for making it this far. And follow us on all the social links: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and take care. And we will be back next week.
Bye.